Welcome to UO Today. I'm Barbara Altman, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest today is Donald Etherington, internationally known book conservator, fine binder, and instructor. Etherington began bookbinding at the age of 13 as a student at the Central School of Arts and Crafts in London, and later went on to study bookbinding and design at the London School of Printing. He has held positions at the Biblioteca Nazionale in Florence, the Library of Congress, the Harry Ransom Humanities Research Center at the University of Texas at Austin, and Information Conservation Incorporated. In 1982, Etherington co-authored with Matt Roberts the book entitled Bookbinding and the Conservation of Books, a Dictionary of Descriptive Terminology. This was the first comprehensive attempt to compile terminology from all the bookmaking and conservation fields. His autobiography, Bookbinding and Conservation, a 60-year Odyssey of Art and Craft, published in 2010, details his lifelong journey of bookbinding and conservation. Etherington has been made an honorary member in the American Institute for Conservation and the Guild of Bookworkers. His work can be found in collections worldwide. Etherington gave a lecture entitled A 60-Year Odyssey in Bookbinding and Conservation on April 13, 2010, as a guest of University of Oregon Libraries. His lecture was part of the campus-wide Year of the Book series. Don, welcome to UO Today.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time to talk to us. I have to lead with the obvious question: how does a lad of 13 decide to become a bookbinder?
I haven't got a damn good answer, but in those days there was an exam called the 11 plus exam, which thank goodness is not in existence anymore, because you started school at 3, at 11 you had to take the exam, and if you didn't pass you became on the failure stream. You left school at 14. So anyway, at 11 I got a free pass, which means I was sort of on the bubble, I suppose, and you're given a second chance at 13 to go into a technical college or carry on an academic path. So I decided to go on the technical side, and they give you a list of 100 crafts, and I chose bookbinding, silversmithing and engraving as my first choices, and then you are invited to get a portfolio of work together, have an interview, and you get selected, if you're lucky, in one of those crafts. And I really wanted to do bookbinding, but as I said before, I have no clue why bookbinding was even in my 3 selections. But anyway, I did get accepted in the class, and there were 6 people, get selected in London, and so that's the beginning, as we might say, to a long time.
Were you a bookish child? Did you have an appreciation
No.
for the quality of books?
I don't think we ever had any books in the house.
So this is really a fortuitous accident that you happened to take that path and be selected for it.
Yeah, my father was a house painter, and he was painting Hatchard's, the famous bookstore in Piccadilly. There were some bindings in the window. Now this is a very tenuous connection, but it may have been the only thing that I can connect it with. And I was there and I saw them, and now did that strike a chord? It may have done, but I have no clue really why.
But clearly it must have captured your attention the very moment you walked in there as a learning apprentice, yes?
Oh, now when I went to the school, it was interesting. After the first day, I actually said to myself, do you know, I love this.
After
now,
the first day.
And I think that's amazing, because you didn't do anything sort of wild and wonderful, in the first day. But that's exactly what I said. I said, I really love this. and for the last 60 years I've been loving it since.
Yes, and now you're a leader in the field of conservation, and it clearly you were in the right place at the right time.
That's right, that's right.
Don, I wanted to ask you about the Dictionary of Descriptive Terminology that you co-authored. It, the vocabulary of bookbinding is very technical, and as an example of that, I wanted to read the description of this, the binding on this really beautiful, sumptuous James Joyce Ulysses from 1936. The binding is described as follows: covered in full black super chieftain, green oasis, and orange French Levant goat skin, orange, white, and green hand-sewn silk end hands.
End bands.
I beg your pardon, end bands. I need to put my glasses on. Decor of colored onlays with blind and palladium tooling, and then it gives the dimensions in centimeters. Someone who picked that up and had no idea how bookbinding worked would not understand that description. So many of the words in it are technical. How did you, what fields did you draw on and compile in your dictionary?
Well, basically, there was many books already produced on bookbinding, not so much on conservation at the time, but certainly bookbinding and preservation. And I wanted to bring these terms together. So some of them were terms that we felt were well described, so we used them from other sources. There were many terms in the dictionary that I wrote myself completely, from scratch, because they hadn't been listed in any other form before. But that description of the binding is really very typical what you would see in a catalogue of bindings, and that's been done for hundreds of years. Same thing, but just different materials maybe.
Would your dictionary allow someone who's not an expert in the field to understand the significance of those terms that are commonplace in the descriptions? Or is this also geared for people who know the field?
I think it's more, they would get some interest, because it might be pretty dull if you haven't got a clue to what bookbinding or conservation is. But it's been a useful tool, because even booksellers, rare book dealers, and everybody that I talk to, they use it as their Bible. So that makes you feel good that at least it was useful. Now it's out of date, really now. I'd like to redo it, but think about trying to redo that I may not live that long. So
it would be a major undertaking, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah.
Was your co-author on that Mr. Matt Roberts?
Yeah.
Is he also a conservator?
No. He was working at the Library of Congress like a librarian, and I wrote all the terms if they were new. He went through and did all the niceties, bibliographical citations, and he knew that aspect, so he did that. I wrote I'll put them all in. He went through them and tidied them up and made them correct. And so it was 11 years it took.
Goodness, it was 11 years.
Oh, no, sorry, it took 7 years to do it. And then it took 4 years for the Library of Congress to finish getting it printed and published. So.
I can see why you're a little reluctant to jump in and overhaul it again. Right. Don, you've worked all over the world, and you've provided a lot of help in areas where there have been disasters affecting books. I'm thinking particularly about Florence, the flood of the River Arno in 1966. You worked there at the Biblioteca Nazionale, did you not?
Right.
Could you describe what you were doing there to help out with the
Mainly I went the beginning, my first trip there was in December of '66. So the flood had happened, and I was there to help train the Italian workers that they'd hired, literally off the street, really, to tackle the enormous problem. I mean, there was, I think, 400,000 volumes that were damaged, and I'd been, I was training in England and had running courses in England, so they asked me to be part of the British team, so I went over as the training officer, and we just started training them and get them into the right techniques and the right materials, and so it was wonderful. It really was the, as we might say, the watershed of my career, even though that's a little corny. But it really was, because up to that moment I was teaching in England, and most likely would have stayed in England, but for the Florence Flood, because through having experienced, you know, we were always trained in the early days on single items. Now you're faced with thousands of items, and I think, and I say this with all humbleness, that I think I had the ability or the freedom or the not to be tied up in knots about single item. I had the freedom to think about large amounts of books at one time, mass treatments, and that freedom allowed me to accept the large numbers of books but not get, you know, so overwhelmed. And through that, after 2 years there, in 1969-70, the Library of Congress asked me if I would set up a program with Peter Waters there, training again new conservators. And basically it's a numbers game at the Library of Congress, where they have millions of books and hundreds and thousands of manuscripts that all need treatment. So in a funny way, it wasn't caused by water damage or oil, but it was caused by the large number of items.
And that was specifically what you were charged with, I believe, at the Library of Congress, correct? You were developing new techniques for the conservation of large collections.
Right.
I've noticed, I noticed on your CV that you have subsequently done a great deal of consulting work with large institutions for the preservation of their collections. I noted, for example, that you worked with Princeton University with a historic New Orleans collection, the Museum of Natural History of LA County, and the State Libraries of Nevada and Connecticut. You've done a lot of work in big institutions.
Yeah, but, you know, I suppose it's normal. I mean, to me, it's, you know, over a number of years, you do a lot of things.
Well, you have a very refreshing humility. But let me ask you, your specialty, or one of your areas of specialization, is the treatment of large collections, but you have also worked on a number of very precious individual documents.
Right.
Would you be willing to talk about your work on one of the copies of the Magna Carta and the replica of the Declaration of Independence?
Well, yeah, we have to be careful about when we say the replica, but
okay.
The Magna Carta of 1297 was purchased by Ross Perot for 1.5 million, and he brought it to Texas, and while I was at Texas, and we needed to do some restoration on it, but then we had to prepare it for exhibit nationwide and also at the National Archives. Because most of these documents that are so important at this level, you try not to do too much to the document, and the main responsibility is to allow it to be exhibited without damage to the document through light or whatever, security and so on. So that was pretty exciting, because the fun part was to fly back and forth from Dallas to Washington in a Learjet, 40,000 feet. It's pretty exciting. And but he was fun to work with, actually. Even, you know, certain issues with him were sort of strange, but I actually enjoyed working with him. And
what about the Declaration of Independence? You warned me about the use of the term replica. What did you do in that instance?
It all depends, and I'm not trying to be pedantic, but there's the Declarations of Independence, like the Declaration of Independence, which is, there's only one, and it's in the National Archives, and I was the parchment consultant to that a few years ago when they closed the archives and redid the whole rotunda for showing what they call the 7 Charters of Freedom, Constitution, Bill of Rights and so on. And they asked me if I would be responsible for the presentation, if you like, of the document in its new home. And they asked all sorts of requirements, you know, if you're going to do, we don't want to mat it, you know, like a print or a drawing. We want to show the natural edges of the skin, and we want it to be done in a safe way, of course, and because the original is in pretty bad shape. And so that was my responsibility, to come up with different ideas to show that safely. And it's so funny because the other one I did, when I said about the replica, there's the stone copy of the Declaration of Independence, which was done in I think it was 1823, and on the behest of the government, because they felt then that the document, the original, was not in such good shape. So they asked Stone, I think it's John Stone, to make a facsimile of the Declaration. Well, what he did, we think anyway, we're pretty certain he put wet blotting paper on top of and got an impression, and then they had an engraving made. That issue of putting wet blotting paper, if you like, didn't do the original much good. But there's a funny story about that stone copy, because there was 35 in existence, and there might have been 200 originally, but there's 35 known, right? Somebody brought one into the lab a couple of years ago, and it was rolled up and it was all oily, you know, and I thought, well, this is another one of these, when people bring things in, they say they have this or that, and it's generally not true, and they get all upset. But anyway, we unrolled it, and lo and behold, it was an original copy, if you like, of the stone copy. And he had purchased it in Nashville at a junk store for $2.48 because of the size. She sold, the woman who was running the store sold these things by size, so he paid $2.48. We stored it, got it into good shape, and he sold it for $477,000.
That's an extraordinary story.
So,
it's the kind of story that motivates people to bring the findings from the attic or the basement into to experts.
But in the reverse, people who bring things in thinking they have something and it's not, they get very upset with you.
I'm sure you're not always the bearer of good news.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Don, what have been some of the most challenging projects you've undertaken, either because of their scope or because of their technical difficulty?
It's a question that's asked a lot, and it's difficult for me to answer, not to be sort of silly, but there's different things that create difficulties. That's, it's not just necessarily the document or the item. I remember doing a very famous painting that was on parchment, but it was drummed, and I'm not trying to make it too complicated, but it's drummed. It was like a painting. It was tipped all around the edges with tacks, and we needed to get it off. Oh no, it was on paper, I'm sorry. Anyway, it was a very famous painting on paper, and we needed to get it off the frame. But every time you took one of those tacks out, there was this sharp, and your heart goes in your mouth, because it would be easy to split the whole thing. So that was the most situation where I was very nervous. But there's other jobs that are difficult from a technical standpoint. You have to be careful about what you do in another sense, but that was the most difficult one, because every time I heard that ping, I thought, oh God, it's going to tear right in half. But other things like the Declaration and that are important, and when you're trying to preserve these icons of our cultural heritage, you have a responsibility. So it becomes another type of thought process and difficulties, if you like. So.
What do you think are the abilities, the traits that make for a good conservator? I'm guessing, just from your description of that painting, very steady hands, nerves of steel, and attention to detail. What else do you think makes a good conservator?
Not worry about being rich. That's the first thing. Love of the work, really enjoy it, and really enjoy it, you know. I don't know. You have to have an ability to tackle these difficult jobs without getting all worked up and nervous. If you're nervous, that's when you make a mistake. So you have to have good hands, but positive motions. You know, it shouldn't be shaking and thinking about more the value of the piece than the job in hand. So I think, but you have to have a good eye too. You know, people, they always use, I teach people in my work not to use a ruler, because all these young people, they always want to use a ruler. Don't use a ruler, use your eye. That will, because then you'll be amazed how accurate you can see 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch by your eye and not any ruler. So I think there's some of the traits. But I think loving what you're doing is important.
You do a great deal of workshops. I understand the way you learned this trait and the way you are passing it on to other generations. It is really something that is learned in the doing. Is that correct?
I think so, yeah. And you know, all the different experiences that you, over the years, the actual doing of something is by repetitive action. You only become good if you keep doing it. So it becomes boring sometimes, right? But you really have to have that, let's say, innate skill. It has to be developed. It doesn't come just naturally. And so in the old days, when I was first being trained, it was a lot of repetitive actions. And that makes you real confident with the tools of the trade. That doesn't happen so much nowadays. You know, I run a workshop, right? Well, it's for a week, right? So let's say, well, those people, do they go back and work for another 10 weeks on doing the same thing? I doubt it. So there's a few things where those hand skills get lost, you know, and so my role is to try to encourage, you know, these young people. I say young people at 74, I can say that now, to practice. So.
Don, your visit here is part of a whole series of programming that's been taking place all over campus with all kinds of different events, but we've been calling it the Year of the Book. I'd love to ask you, while we have you here, you know certainly the old Mark Twain line about the report of my death was greatly exaggerated. Do you think the report of the death of the book is exaggerated?
Yes. I've been hearing about the death of the book for the last 5 years, I think. Does it mean there's going to be change? Yes. Conservation funding is down. Digitization, scanning is up. All these library directors want to get on the same bandwagon. They somehow forget the immense value of the collections they have. I mean, most major libraries have millions and millions of dollars worth of materials in their care, but it doesn't seem to get them to think we should be preserving that material. So I think there's going to be some changes, but interestingly, with the digitization and scanning, it's made the public more aware of materials in special collections in different universities across the world, and it's creating a greater interest for those people to go to those institutions to see the work when they see it on the computer, and it generates an interest now where it wasn't known before. And because I think the special collections areas are going to have more visitors and use, it means they're going to have more conservation done to those materials. Of course, that sounds pretty crass, and it maybe is, but that's the business I'm in. But so I don't think it's totally dead. Even I bought a Kindle for my wife, which was pretty blasphemous to do, but it's pretty nice. So.
I notice you say you purchased it as a gift for your wife rather than purchasing it for yourself.
That's true.
Do you still prefer to read from a paper volume?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I have a book I'm reading currently on her Kindle, even though I can't get it away from her to finish it.
Well, good for you. I think we're all trying to adapt as technologies shift.
Right.
One last question, Don, before we have to close. You are also the maker of very beautiful bindings.
No.
With all your conservation work, do you have much time to create bindings, design them?
Now I do. I'm sort of on my semi-retirement streak, if you like. And now I'm spending a lot more time at home in our studio doing design bindings, which I've never had the time up to now. So
this is a good thing. You're enjoying yourself.
Oh yeah, I didn't think I would like retirement. I mean, I don't think of being retired even now, but the concept. But actually, I quite like it.
I think you have earned the right to spend time in your studio. And thank you so much for coming to talk to us.
No problem. Thank you.
We have been speaking with Donald Etherington, internationally known book conservator, fine binder, and instructor. He gave a lecture entitled A 60-Year Odyssey in Bookbinding and Conservation on April 13th, 2010, as a guest of the University of Oregon Libraries. Etherington's lecture was part of the campus-wide series Year of the Book. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.